Cognitive learning. What is cognition? It is the ability of the brain's mental process to absorb and retain information through experience, senses, and thought. Cognitive learning. It is an active style of learning that focuses on helping to learn to maximize your brain's potential. So before going to the details, please remember to subscribe this channel. Please do watch other videos in this channel and share it with the students and those who love learning psychology. Thank you. In cognitive learning theory, the psychologists view learning in terms of the thought process or the cognition that underlie it. The cognitive learning theory suggests that it is not enough to say that people make response because there is an assumed link between a stimulus and a response due to a past history of reinforcement to the response. Instead, according to this point of view, that is according to the cognitive learning theory, the people and even animals, they develop an expectation that they will receive a reinforcer to make a response. Let us learn about the insight learning and the latent learning. Insight means an understanding about the situation and latent means hidden or concealed. Insight learning and its stages. One type of learning that is not determined only by conditioning occurs when we suddenly find the solution to a problem, as if the idea just popped into our head. This type of learning is known as insight learning, the sudden understanding of a solution to a problem. The German psychologist Wolfgang Kohler, he carefully observed what happened when he presented chimpanzees with a problem that was not easy for them to solve. In his experiment, he placed food in an area that was too high in the cage to be reached. He found that the chimpanzee first engaged in trial and error attempts at solving the problem. That means to get the food. But when these failed, they seemed to stop and contemplate. That is, they looked thoughtful for a while. After this period of contemplation, they suddenly seemed to know how to solve the problem. For example, they used a stick to knock the food down, and in some other times they stand on the box that is inside the cage to reach to the food. Kohler argued that it was this flash of insight and not the prior trial and error approaches which were so important for the conditioning theories. Here in this case, the flash of insight allowed the animal to solve the problem. From his study, he developed 4 stages of insight learning. First one is preparation. The process begins as you try to solve the problem. You have the materials and information in front of you and begin to make connections. Although you see the relationships between the materials, things just haven't clicked yet. That is the flash that didn't came to your mind. This is the stage where you start to get frustrated. Then comes the incubation stage. During this period, you give up for a short period of time. Although you have abandoned the project, your brain is still making connections on an unconscious level. Then comes insight. When the right connections have been made in your mind, an aha moment occurs. Then verification. Now you have to make sure that your epiphany is right. You test out your solution and hopefully it works. This is a great moment in your learning journey. The connections you make solving this problem are likely to help you in the future. So, this is the experiment by Wolfgang Kohler regarding the inside learning and various stages involved in this learning. What is inside learning? It is the abrupt realization of a problem solution. It is a completely cognitive experience that requires the ability to visualize the problem and the solution internally. When a problem cannot be solved by applying an obvious step-by-step solving sequence, then inside learning occurs when the mind rearranges the elements of the problem and find connections that were not obvious in the initial presentation of the problem. Here, the people experience a sudden aha moment. Inside learning is a process that leads to a sudden realization regarding a problem. And in inside learning, the following event occurs. First one, the solution comes suddenly after a period during which various response strategies are tried. Then there is a perceptual rearrangement. Then finally the solution comes. And it can be generalized rather to other similar problems. Next is latent learning. The term latent learning was coined by the psychologist Edward Tolman during his research with rats. He studied the behavior of three groups of rats that were learning to navigate through mazes. The first group always received a reward of food at the end of the maze. The second group never received any reward. And the third group received a reward but on the 11th day of the experiment. You might expect, when considering the principle of the conditioning, the rats in the first group quickly learned to negotiate the maze, while the rats of the second group seemed to wander aimlessly through it. And the rats in the third group, however, although they wandered aimlessly for the first 10 days and quickly learned to navigate to the end of the maze as soon as they received the food on 11th day. By the next day, the rats in the third group had caught up in their learning to the rats that had been rewarded from the beginning. It was clear to Tolman that the rats that had been allowed to experience the maze even without any reinforcement had nevertheless learned something. They learned something, and the Tolman called this latent learning. Latent learning refers to the learning that is not reinforced and not demonstrated until there is a motivation to do so. So, in the third group of rats, as soon as they were reinforced by presenting food, they quickly learned. Tolman argued that the rats had formed a cognitive map of the maze but did not demonstrate this knowledge until they received the reinforcement. So, latent learning, it refers to learning that is not reinforced and not demonstrated until there is a motivation to do so. Sometimes learning only becomes evident when we need to utilize it. According to psychologists, this hidden learning that only manifests itself when reinforcement is offered is known as the latent learning. For example, you might have learned how to cook something by watching your parents prepare the dinner. This learning may not be apparent until you find yourself having to cook a meal on your own. Cognitive map. Tolman coined the term cognitive map, which is an internal representation or image of external environmental feature or landmark. He thought that individuals acquire large number of cues, that is signals, from the environment and could use these to build a mental image of an environment. By using this internal representation of a physical space, they could get to the goal by knowing where it is in a complex of environmental features. Shortcuts and changeable routes are possible with this model. Consider the example. You know various routes in your hometown. Every day you travel in a variety of routes and learn the locations of different businesses in your town. However, this learning is latent or hidden because you are not using it most of the time. It is only when you need to find a specific location, for example, a nearest coffee shop or a bus stop, that you are required to draw on and demonstrate what you have learned. The latent learning correlates with many higher level mental abilities, such as the problem solving and planning for the future. So, what we have learned? Let's have a quick recap. We have learned what is insight learning and latent learning. Insight is a sudden understanding of the components of a problem that makes the solution apparent. And latent learning, it refers to learning that is not reinforced and not demonstrated until there is motivation to do so. We have learned the experiments, the stages and the events occurred in insight learning and the experiments conducted in latent learning and the cognitive map. Hope you like this video. Please like, share and subscribe. Thank you and keep smiling.